call myself a reformed sociophobe. So I'm really aiming this at introverts, but introverts in particular who have that intersection which is quite common with social anxiety and neuroticism. And there's nothing wrong with being an introvert, it's just a personality type. Sometimes need these kind of tricks up our sleeve to navigate different social situations. And I came from this as someone who, as you might tell from the addiction memoir, spent a long time sober. So at 8 years, I gave up alcohol, which was my main kind of social crutch. It's a wonderful bonding agent, alcohol. Yeah. It's almost as bonding as glue. I'd always gone for introverts. I thought they're more mysterious, although I'm seeing my first cards-carrying extrovert, and he really is somebody who's an optimistic, glass half full kind of person, whereas I'm more guarded. Introverts make up about 25 to 35% of the population, depending on what study you look at. So we are a minority. We are living in an extrovert's world. I'm an author who takes deep dives into the human psyche through books such as my memoir, Woman of Substances, A Journey into Addiction and Treatment, which made it onto university lists, and also The Introvert's Guide to Leaving the House, which is a self-help book blended with memoir. My mission is to help people read and write their way out of a crisis. I also teach people how to write their own stories through memoir and other first-person writing. I've taught hundreds of people over 5 years, and 3 books have been published with top publishing companies.
I'm Di Gillett, and this is the Power of Women podcast. We're a platform that showcases and celebrates the strength, resilience, and achievements of women from all walks of life, including those whose success stories weren't always lived in the spotlight. For most of her professional life, Jenny Valentish came up with excuses not to speak to the media or grace the stage, and resorted to Dutch courage before going to social events. Eventually, she decided enough was enough and embarked on a 5-year mission to become more outgoing, setting herself exercises in etiquette, empathy, and positive reframing. Since then, she's given keynote talks, fought in kickboxing rings in front of baying crowds, and competed in bodybuilding in a sequined bikini and heels. And somebody in my family's done that too, so I wonder whether you've come up against each other. She's also a journalist who has edited consumer magazines Time Out Melbourne and Triple J magazine. Her byline has appeared all over Australia and UK newspapers and magazines. Jenny is the author of 5 books, including the Walkley-nominated addiction memoir, Women of Substances, and her newest book, as she mentioned, The Introvert's Guide to Leaving the House, is a blend of memoir and self-help aimed at people with social anxiety. It's also the background for today's conversation, which will be a powerful insight into navigating your career as an introvert. Jenny Valentish, welcome to the Power of Women podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Di.
Jenny, you speak using the language of a loner, the overthinker, the aloof, the awkward. For anyone who's felt that way, particularly in professional settings, that's kind of disarming. That's a difficult place to come from. What made you write a book around this?
I wanted to write almost like an anti-social self-help book because I find a lot of
tautology.
Yes, well, I find a lot of self-help, be it, TED Talks or books or whatever it is, can be super earnest and, very, very confident, which, if we want to inspire confidence, but at the same time, it can be kind of daunting. So I wanted to let the readers know, look, we're on the same page for a start. I call myself a reformed sociophobe, but there's always work to do. So I'm really aiming this at introverts, but introverts in particular who have that intersection, which is quite common with social anxiety and neuroticism. So this is aimed at them, and introverts make up about 25 to 35% of the population, depending on what study you look at. So we are a minority. We are living in an extrovert's world. And there's nothing wrong with being an introvert. It's just a personality type. But given we are living in an extrovert's world, we do sometimes need these kind of tricks up our sleeve to navigate different social situations. So that's why I wanted to write it. And I came from this as someone who, as you might tell from the addiction memoir, spent a long time sober. So 8 years I gave up alcohol, which was my main kind of social crutch, if you like. You know, Dutch
Every
courage.
introvert's social crutch.
Yeah. I mean,
or nearly.
It's a wonderful bonding agent, alcohol.
Yeah.
It's almost as bonding as glue. So, you know, to give that up, you almost have to start again from scratch, learning how to be social. I certainly did, because I started drinking at a very young age, 13. So I hadn't learned all the necessary skills that I needed to. So when it came to my early to mid 30s, when I gave up, I just had to really tackle my social skills head on. And I did that through all sorts of exercises that I set myself. I like to project manage my way out of a crisis. So every kind of exercise that I gave myself wound up in this book. I really have done them all. And not only that, but later I came to date an extrovert for the first time. I'd always gone for introverts. I thought they're more mysterious, although it's more that you can just project anything onto them and then you eventually find out what they're like. And you're like, oh, that wasn't what I thought. But anyway, I'm seeing my first cards-carrying extrovert, and he really is somebody who's an optimistic, glass-half-full kind of person who, when he meets strangers, he just thinks, new friend, whereas I'm more guarded. And so watching him in action as well was the final impetus to write this book, because I thought, I still have a certain degree of social reluctance that's just hardwired, even though I've come up with all these kind of techniques. So I wanted to explore that as well, take a deep dive into the psychology of social reluctance in chapters called Why Should I? And What's Your Origin Story? With the aim of this being just a really, really well-rounded book for people who want to put themselves out there, having trouble, not sure why.
Yeah. And it may also be a really good tool for an extrovert to understand what this minority group, being the introverts, have to cope with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, join us. No, I've actually heard from quite a few extroverts who said this book really worked for them as well, because at its essence, it's a book about wanting to rebuild, a book about wanting to become more something. And so I've had a few extroverts who've experienced things like trauma and grief and social anxiety, which extroverts experience too. And they've actually said that a lot of this book shined with them as well. So that was a real bonus.
Yeah. And I'm looking at the copy on the desk here. It's well leafed. So you've you've referred to it on many an occasion. Jenny, you write about the spotlight effect and the sense that everyone is watching and judging. And I mean, I can almost feel that. I mean, sitting in a room here with cameras, it certainly feels like that. When that spotlight feeling kicks in, how do you deal with it?
Yeah, it's interesting, actually. So I'd always had this feeling that I was being analysed and scrutinised dating back to sort of early teens. Some might call it paranoia. But even things like I became a bit obsessed with the idea that I might have like a bit of toilet paper trailing from my shoe. And it's actually never happened to me. But it just became this kind of fear. So that's just a small example of what the spotlight effect is like. And it's actually something called an egocentric bias. And it's where we think that our actions are being scrutinised and they are influencing others' behaviour. So it's basically overestimating people's analysis of us. You know, in reality, people are going about their own lives, they have their own worries, they're worried about people looking and, you know, judging them. So there's a whole chapter about the fear of judgment and how we overcome that. You know, if you're the kind of person who is known to sort of set their social media to private, then public, then private, then public, you know, that kind of occasional freak out, or is, you know, will spend nights awake worrying about what people are saying or thinking, then this one's for you. And it is really common, and it was actually a huge relief to me to know that there's actually a name for it, the spotlight effect.
Yeah. Is there an intersection in that character trait with perfectionism? Do they have an intersection?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, perfectionists are really super hard on themselves. They're self-flagellators and overthinkers. So they do tend to be people who, it's a horrible word, but are neurotic. It's just the psychological term that covers this, but it has kind of connotations of being, I don't know, just, hand-wringer and nail-biter. But people who are hard on themselves and high achievers definitely could be experiencing the spotlight effect as well. And also, I think its twin is, what's the word for it? Imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we talk about that. We've got an episode that is coming up with Alison Shamir, who's one of the leading imposter syndrome experts. So
it's mainly women.
That one too. It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's because, there's this kind of historical sense of you shouldn't be here in this room.
Correct.
Or if it's just that we're more willing to vocalise what's going on in our heads.
Well, a bit of both. It's not gender exclusive, but it is certainly more prevalent in women than in men. And you've really pushed through this because you've put yourself on the stage in the barest of outfits, because bodybuilding is seriously putting yourself out there on display.
Yeah.
And you've done keynote speaking as well. How have you actually pushed yourself to that level as an introvert?
It's funny, actually, because I had, as many of us do, an inner critic. And mine actually sort of lived in my head for decades. And it had a really weird genesis. It was when I was a young publicist. This very famous pop star came into our office, and I was so excited because he was my hero. And he was just very disdainful because I was like, very junior. I was a woman, and he refused to talk to me, and I was gutted. And somehow that lodged in my brain, where he was this inner critic that stayed with me for decades, but he wouldn't talk to me. So it was just this kind of silent judge of everything that I did. So I've always had this kind of self-imposed judge living in my head. And I thought, a few years ago, I'm actually going to, as somebody who goes to the gym a lot, I'm going to try bodybuilding and be literally judged by a panel of judges, absolutely scrutinised under spotlights in the most flimsy of sequin bikinis, which is not me at all.
That's pushing the boundaries.
Exactly. It's like, it's really good sometimes to do something where you think, if I survive this, then I can survive anything.
Yeah.
And so this was kind of like a immersion therapy where you absolutely dunk yourself in your fear and then come out of it and think, okay, well, that's fine now. So I am a bit of a believer in, with a bit of humour, tackling head on what it is that ails you. I suppose it's, if you're a journalist or something like a podcaster, you do have the extra security blanket of, well, I'm doing this so I can report on it. And if you fall on your face, then it's all good material.
Part of the story.
But at the same time, I think it really did contribute to me thinking, okay, that was fun. I survived it. You can put yourself out there.
Yeah. And how did you go in terms of the comp?
A gold and a bronze.
There you go. Yeah. Brilliant. So taking this away from sort of the personal one-on-one, you talk about managing staff as an introvert's horror story, which I totally get. What advice would you have for somebody who's stepping into a leadership role but doesn't naturally feel equipped to do that, to stand up front and lead?
And I've experienced this myself because I was an editor for various magazines for 8 years, and this was the toughest thing. Like, I loved being able to pass on things that I'd learnt and have that kind of feeling of mentorship. But when it came to managing staff, as in you've got to have a bit of a word to them, as someone who's quite conflict averse, that was really tricky. And I would often find myself like slightly angled away, trying to rush through it, getting it done as quickly as possible. So I actually talked to somebody who is an improv actor about this, but he also does corporate events.
My stepdaughter's an improv actor, yeah.
There's a lot to be learnt.
There is.
His name's Bronnie Isle, and he works for the Improv Conspiracy. And he was talking about the idea of, okay, so when you have a conversation with somebody, you really, especially if it's a tricky conversation, you really want to be listening to connect not listening to respond. So oftentimes, even in this scenario that we're in now, we might be sort of half listening to each other, but thinking about what's my next question or answer going to be. Whereas, his advice is you really want to be 100% fully absorbing what they're saying, particularly if it's something like managing staff where they're going to have some concerns and you don't want to be just leaping in with the dressing down that you have to give. I'm also a bit of a believer in visualizing before you have a difficult meeting, how that's going to go, thinking about the other person, taking the time to think about what their needs are, even maybe visualizing them with a big smile on their face, or, you rooting for each other. Like, I firmly believe that works, where you just mentally put yourself in a scenario and run it through, but give it a good outcome. And then when you go in, if you ask them open-ended questions and try and start the conversation with what's going on for them and what might their suggestion be to improve things, then you're really turning it into a collaboration rather than, there being a power dynamic where in theory you're supposed to be the one with the power, but perhaps through, lack of confidence, it's hard for you to instill that. If you make it more of a collaborative conversation, you're going to get more out of it, both of you.
And that reference point you made about talking with somebody who is an improv performer, I mean, there's nothing more intent than that in terms of what they listen to and respond, for somebody being focused on the in-the-moment scenario.
Yeah.
That's quite genius.
Yeah, I mean, the golden rule of improv is you never block, right? So you always want to be adding to what the other person has said. It's called yes and.
It's constant layering.
Yeah. So even if you're disagreeing with what they've come up with, you would be saying something and I'd be going, yes. And then maybe, and you might be pivoting it slightly, but you want to show that you've heard, and then you're building on that, you're adding to it.
Yeah, it's a far more engaging style.
Yeah.
So coming up, let's talk about how to be visible without that causing anxiety, and also let's dig into conflict avoidance. If you're loving the Power of Women podcast, be sure to jump on to our YouTube channel and hit that subscribe button to ensure you never miss an episode. You've said that much of our fear in social or professional situations is actually about control. And I asked this as an over-preparer, and I am a chronic over-preparer. But how does that show up for introverts?
Can I just say I really appreciated all the over-preparing that you did there. It was great, weeks out. I loved it.
That probably doesn't happen that often. So, yeah, I told you I'm chronic.
I'm a chronic over-preparer too. And the final chapter of the book is called Are You a Control Freak? And I'd realised...
I'm one of those too.
I realised as I was writing it, wow, there's a theme of control in every chapter. Because if you're someone who's socially anxious and or a perfectionist and or an overthinker, then it pains you when you can't predict and control all the variables and parameters of a situation. You want to be able to feel that you're in control when you get there and you'll know what's going on. So there are many unhealthy ways that we try and control things. For instance, Dutch courage. I'm just going to have a few drinks before I go on stage. Or there's something I call being a job's worth, which is an English term for someone who is quite unhelpful. It stands for, I'm sorry, I can't do that. It's more than my job's worth. And it's about people who are just unhelpful because they're worried about how much the other person will try and take from them if they help. And so that's another form of control, of like dampening down how much you give to people. And so the final chapter is about, okay, replacing those unhealthy methods of controlling things with more healthy ways. So for instance, I find it quite difficult to give somebody a lot of attention face to face. I can do it in an interview mode because I've got a role here. and I've prepared.
And on stage, because it's easier when you've got that distance between you.
And you're not having a conversation on stage, you're talking at people. It's perfect for introverts, actually.
Yeah.
So a way for me to feel like I can control the situation without it being toxic control is I might suggest to someone we do a shoulder-to-shoulder activity, which is we go out for a walk or we go to a gallery, we're experiencing something together. So even if it's getting to know a colleague at work or managing staff, maybe there's a shoulder-to-shoulder way you can do things. That's why you have team bonding trips, isn't it? It's because you're not sat across a boardroom table from each other all the time.
Yeah. And I have found that quite often if you're in a scenario where that discussion is with a male versus a female, the shoulder-to-shoulder style is far more effective because it's not confronting. It's takes away all of those barriers where I think it's easier to sit across the table from a female as a female and have that one-on-one conversation. But if you take it out of that setting, as you've suggested, I think when you're having the conversation with a male, it's far more likely that they're going to open up and disclose.
And funnily enough, it is quite a male thing to do the shoulder-to-shoulder activity. The men's shed, doing things shoulder-to-shoulder is basically their slogan.
Is that right?
Yeah, and Germaine Greer, the feminist, went on Louis Theroux's podcast, and she was saying something I think actually women could learn from men is meeting up and doing things shoulder-to-shoulder like a game of pool, rather than it being a trade of information. I'm going to tell you something, you tell me something. So I get what you're saying, but even for an introvert or someone who's socially anxious, even sitting across from a woman can be, it's kind of like a gender-free thing. It's just the amount of social battery we have that can be drained when we have to do prolonged face-to-face eye contact.
Yeah, and I think dare we hark back to that period of COVID in lockdown, shoulder-to-shoulder became the way of conversing. And probably a lot
distance.
But it probably introduced a lot of people to it that they hadn't actually engaged or had a meeting or a professional dialogue in that manner before.
Yeah.
So I think that really worked. And conflict is where many of us fall apart, especially those who fear emotional fallout or overthink every word. What's your advice for the conflict avoidant woman in the workplace?
I would first suggest you ask yourself, what is my definition of conflict? Because I think for people who are socially anxious stroke introverts, it can be really broad and it actually goes beyond what most of us think of what conflict is. So I'll give you an example. I find things like football matches and concerts quite difficult because the roar of the crowd, especially a male kind of reaction, my brain struggles to differentiate between excitement and aggression. And you could put that in a boardroom situation too. So if somebody is talking with in a heated way and is furiously making a point, has raised their voice even a notch, to me that's conflict. To other people, that might not be conflict at all. To other people, this is an interesting debate and discussion. And again, it's been great having this extrovert partner who actually really enjoys getting in a bit of debate with people or arguing at front desk or persuading at front desk for an extended checkout or something, things that I would really rather die than do. Watching him really enjoy it has given me a bit of a different perspective.
I'm laughing because I'm married into a European household and the number of times I've said, why is that Greek couple fighting? It's like, no, they're not. They're inviting us in for tea. And it can be lost in cultural dialogue as well. So
one of my favourite podcasts is called The Rest is Entertainment, and it's got two hosts, and one of them, Richard Osman, is a really popular author, a novelist, and it's been a real learning process for me listening to him as well, because he's a really pleasant, affable guy, but he loves a bit of sort of verbal biffo, He loves getting into a disagreement with his co-host, and you can hear in his voice he takes nothing personally, because it's not personal. They can have, she gets heated about points, and he just riffs off that, and you think, okay, to me, she's raising her voice and being quite hostile. He loves it.
Feeds off it.
Feeds off it, and it turns into a really interesting conversation. So I think it's good for people like me to sort of keep an ear out for other people having heated debates that sound like conflict and realise, actually, this isn't escalating into something terrifying. It's actually perhaps getting results.
We didn't touch on, you've done the bodybuilding, but you've also done kickboxing, yeah? So that's a physically conflicting setting to put yourself in.
Much better.
How does that work for you though, as an introvert?
It was much less terrifying. I think introverts are afraid that they'll lose control. So if you have grown up perhaps in a family like mine that was quite insular, like we only ate together once a week and then we all brought a book to the table. So we weren't a family that discussed things. So I'm not used to...
How many at the table?
4.
Okay.
Yeah.
In silence?
Yeah. Yeah. Mum would go, "Oh, we're all going to read, are we?" And then go. So I'm not used to discussion and debate, full stop.
Yeah.
And I think people who aren't used to it are afraid that they'll lose control, or they'll clam up, or they'll explode, and so they avoid conflict at all costs, and if anything, might be a bit passive aggressive in an attempt to avoid being aggressive, which is not an attractive quality. So it was great doing kickboxing, actually being in a ring where it was sanctioned aggression and competition, and I was allowed to like stare down the other person and punch them in the face, and vice versa. I got punched to the canvas and the crowd roared, and I was like, get up. Yeah. And it was like almost like a whole soap opera of conflict in like 3-minute rounds. But because there were sort of rules and an understanding that this is how it goes and there are points, it was such a relief. Whereas to have a verbal sparring with someone, there's none of that. You're acting on your own wits without any rules, and who knows how long it could go on for. So I found it much more of a relief to have this sanctioned physical conflicts.
Yeah. And what about when we talk about online? Because, I mean, this online now is where so much of our interaction is. In terms of staying visible online, do you get that same feeling of fear around the introversion coming back at you?
Well, I'm Gen X, so we were kind of raised, first of all, not to sell out and not to put yourself out there. Like, that's really distasteful. And being English, that's a similar...
Another layer.
Another layer. And I have felt in the past this weird push-pull. Sometimes I used to really put myself out there online and like do all my training videos, like showing off. But I would hardly ever say anything. Like I preferred Instagram because you barely put any kind of captions. So I had this quite weird relationship with social media. But I've found that, you know, in promoting books, because you want to have a consistent brand, and brand might feel distasteful to some people, but I've found that you can do it on your own terms. So I'm personally not someone who wants to talk earnestly to camera and be the expert voice direct to you. That would just be too out of character for me personally. So I do things like skits. Yep. Like my partner's an actor. We've gone down the hopefully funny skit route, and I find that like a much more comfortable way for me personally to get across my message to people. But there are other ways you can do it. I think doing behind the scenes stuff, people love that. So then you don't have to be talking to camera, but you might show, like my friend is a florist and she'll do videos where she speeds up her putting together whole bouquets and shows you how she does it. Other people, like sports people, might take you behind the scenes of their training. You know, the videos where you're lifting the curtain and people get to learn something, I think that can be a nice compromise.
Without being direct to camera. I get it. And what about self-promotion? Where do you draw the line on when you're putting yourself out there, being how, you know, that can come across as performative?
Look, it's really hard to draw a line because there are pressures put on you. Like whenever you put a book out, you go to a bookshop to sign some books and it'll be, can you please do a little 2-camera piece for us and hold this up? And, there's so many times where something's sprung at you where, can you just live stream this or do that for, hold up a couple of copies of your book.
And that is performative. That feels most unnatural.
Very cringe.
Yeah.
And I think it's inescapable. And but everyone's kind of forced to do it. And I think we accept that there are going to be sort of cringe moments for all of us on the internet. If we've got any kind of presence where we've had to promote ourselves, I mean, my best advice is we've all got something up there if you Google our names where it's a bit... So sometimes we just have to do what we have to do.
Yeah, and it only stays current for a short period of time.
Yeah, do something else. Push that result down.
Yeah, exactly. And you've said, I love this, you've said introverts don't need fixing, just smarter strategies, which I think is a great line. Where's the starting point for a woman who wants to do things on her own terms based on that?
I think the starting point is recognising your own window of tolerance. So, I mean, we'll have a different window of tolerance for whatever it is. I'm a journalist. If I'm interviewing someone, I've got a good hour of energy where I've prepped. I'm just talking to them. It's a bit of a choreographed dance, so I understand the rules. I can keep that up at full bedazzling effect for an hour. If I'm meeting people for dinner, I know by the time we get to the third course, I'm going to be thinking, as soon as I finish that last spoonful, I've got to come up with an excuse. Parties, I tend to go early to show up and talk to the host early. So you've done your bit and then you've got the option of staying as long as you like.
This is all the over-preparer piece. Yeah, so this is all planned out.
Yeah, I mean,
is it just how it plays out? Yeah.
It's instinctive by now. But I mean, in writing the book, of course, I had to sort of verbalise what I've been doing. And it's like, wow, there's a lot of control in there, Jenny. But yeah, the window of tolerance, just knowing when your social battery is going to run out. And then thinking, okay, if I want to give people my best, because I recommend you always fully commit to whatever it is you do, including going somewhere if you've said you would, then if you think that you're going to wane and fade after X amount of time, then go by that amount of time and just show up and really show up before you go.
It's an interesting point, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of listeners who will relate to this, because I know my husband and I, invariably, if we're going to an event or a function, have actually agreed at what point in time we will exit.
Very sensible.
And one of us will rock up to the other with whatever the prompt is. Yeah, code word, exactly, to get out. And I mean, well, yeah. So we're both, I wouldn't say we're both introverts, but we've got introvert traits.
And you know yourself by now, right? And you know that when it gets to the fourth hour of the party, it's probably time for me to go for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Nothing. What was the song? Is it an Ed Sheeran song like "Nothing Good Happens After 2" or something? Yeah, but we know that, don't we?
Yeah.
But it's after 8.
Yeah. Well, Bruce Gingell used to say to my husband, if you're out after midnight, nothing, trouble's looking for you, basically. And I think it's the same type of line. So having gone all of this journey of literally rebuilding and retooling some extrovert skills as an introvert, what's a phrase that defines you today?
You know what, I've been hearing late bloomer a lot lately, and it's often used to describe...
That doesn't sound very Gen X.
Yeah, but it's often used to describe neurodivergent people, which I am. And I feel that, my 20s and 30s were just this crazed science experiment where I was just all over the place and seeing what happens. And what happens, happens. And then, we'll report on that. And a lot of damage was done, and I was very emotionally sort of immature, but I didn't think I was. And so the 40s was kind of like this era of learning what works. And now I've hit 50. It's like putting it all into place and reaping the rewards.
And for those listening, I need to outline this. For those watching this podcast on the YouTube channel, they can see it. So I'm sitting across the table from Jenny, who's got these amazing stamps on display on her arms. Where does that come into play as part of a statement as being an introvert, or does it?
It's an interesting one, actually. There's even a chapter of the book where I'm talking about the art of the compliments, and I did advise that you don't ever compliment people unless you're a woman. Actually, you can compliment an outfit, but you don't compliment people on their body in any way. And also that goes for tattoos, because I make the point that it may look like someone's covered in tattoos to be an icebreaker for you. But actually, that SpongeBob SquarePants thing could actually be like a shrine to their family, an entire family that was lost in a car crash. You don't know.
True.
So it kind of...
True.
I don't think tattoos have anything to do with someone being an introvert or extrovert. It's maybe like a
part of the
form
narrative.
Of self-expression that's... It's almost like being a comedian on stage or something. It's like you're delivering something, but you're not having a conversation. You know what I mean? You're expressing yourself that way.
Yeah. Interesting. So the latest book has just been released, The Introvert's Guide to Leaving the House. Available all bookshops.
All bookshops. It's lovely. I've been seeing it in the airport bookshops as well, which is also always
fabulous.
A thrill. Online bookshops, all the usual places.
Brilliant. And if somebody's looking to engage you, Jenny, where do they find you?
They can find me at jennyvalentish.com and jennyvalentish@gmail.com.
Brilliant. And on Instagram, because you're out there.
I love the Instagram. So yeah, jennyvalentish_public. That's my main platform.
Brilliant. We will put all of that in the show notes. And I think this is a really interesting episode. I know, like Jenny, I would rather talk to a crowd of 1,000 than walk into a room and talk one-on-one. Mm-hmm. And I know the statistic that you gave when we opened the podcast is it's about 30%.
25 to 35%
of population are introverts. I'm surprised it's as low as that, but I guess with all of the emergence of social media, the generation coming through don't stand a chance of being introverted in an extrovert structured world, and it probably will be an even more difficult place for an introvert to actually live in. So if this episode resonated, be sure to share it with somebody who you think it's helpful, and also refer Jenny's book, The Introvert's Guide to Leaving the House, and we will connect back with you next time. If you're loving the Power of Women podcast, hit that subscribe button and be sure that you never miss an episode. Until next time.